December 6, 1991. Austin, Texas was a city on the rise, a growing tech hub with a vibrant music scene and a small-town charm that was rapidly giving way to urban sprawl. The holiday season was in full swing, and the North Cross Mall area in North Austin was bustling with Friday night shoppers. At the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop on West Anderson Lane, two teenage employees were closing up for the night. 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison and 17-year-old Eliza Thomas had worked together all evening, serving their last customers and beginning the routine of shutting down the shop. With them were Jennifer's younger sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and her best friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers. The younger girls had stopped by to get a ride home with Jennifer after closing. These were normal teenagers living normal lives. Amy loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Sarah was close with her older sister Jennifer, who worked at the yogurt shop to save money. Eliza was a bright student with her whole future ahead of her. By 11:45 p.m., the shop should have been closed and empty. Instead, something unspeakable was taking place inside. Shortly before midnight, an Austin Police Department patrol officer noticed flames coming from the yogurt shop. He immediately radioed dispatch. The Austin Fire Department arrived within minutes. Firefighters rushed to extinguish the blaze, the automatic sprinklers already activated and spraying water throughout the small shop. When they finally pushed through the smoke and entered the back storage room, they made a horrifying discovery. 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, her 15-year-old sister Sarah, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, and 13-year-old Amy Ayers, all four victims of unimaginable violence. Each girl had been forced into the storage room, ordered to undress, bound with their own undergarments, and shot in the head. 3 of the 4 girls had been sexually assaulted. Then, in an apparent attempt to destroy evidence, the killers set the building on fire using paper plates, cups, cardboard, and lighter fluid. The flames were so intense that they melted the top rungs of a heavy aluminum ladder in the back of the store. The news spread through Austin like wildfire. For innocent teenagers murdered in cold blood, the city was traumatized. Austin, which prided itself on being a safe, progressive community, was forced to confront the reality that such evil could strike anywhere. Students at Lanier High School, where the girls attended, struggled to process the loss. Teachers canceled classes. Counselors worked overtime. The community came together in grief. White ribbons appeared on trees throughout the city, honoring the victims. Volunteers distributed thousands of flyers. A group of local entrepreneurs offered a $100,000 reward for information, leading to an arrest and conviction. The investigation was immediately complicated. The fire and the automatic sprinklers had destroyed or contaminated much of the physical evidence. Still, Austin police collected what they could, including DNA evidence from the sexual assaults, 2 different caliber shell casings, .22 and .380, and various other trace evidence. The crime scene suggested military-style precision, 2 different firearms, complete control of 4 victims, systematic destruction of evidence. This was not a random act of teenage violence. The Austin Police Department created a special task force dedicated to solving the yogurt shop murders. Tips poured in by the thousands. Dozens of people confessed to the crimes. Even Kenneth McDuff, a notorious serial killer operating in Texas at the time, confessed to the murders on the day of his execution in 1998. But none of the confessions held up under scrutiny. None of the tips led to a solid suspect. Then, just 1 week after the murders, 16-year-old Maurice Pierce was arrested at North Cross Mall for bringing a gun to the shopping center. The weapon happened to be the same make and model as one of the guns used in the murders. Under hours of intense interrogation by APD homicide detective Hector Polanco, Pierce confessed to the yogurt shop murders. But the next morning, Detective John Jones interviewed Pierce again and realized something was wrong. His confession didn't match the crime scene. The details were incorrect. And when ballistics tests were run on his weapon, the results were inconclusive. The gun couldn't be definitively linked to the murders. Pierce's confession was deemed false, and he was never charged with the yogurt shop murders. 8 years passed. The case grew colder. Families suffered without answers. The city's collective trauma remained unhealed. Then, In 1999, the Yogurt Shop Task Force revisited the case with fresh eyes, reviewing the original files in detail. They identified 4 new suspects who had come up during the investigation. Maurice Pierce again, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, and Forrest Wellborn. Under intense interrogation, both Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott confessed to murders. Each implicated the other. In 2002, both men were tried, convicted of capital murder, and sentenced to death. It appeared that justice had finally been served. But there was a problem, a significant problem. No physical evidence connected Springsteen or Scott to the crime scene. Not a single fingerprint, not a single hair, not a single fiber. And their confessions, which they later recanted, had been obtained after hours upon hours of intense interrogation. Both men claimed their confessions had been made under duress, that detectives had fed them information about the crime scene, that they had been psychologically coerced into admitting to murders they didn't commit. In 2006, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned Robert Springsteen's conviction based on constitutional errors in his trial. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to reinstate the conviction in February 2007. Then came the DNA evidence that changed everything. Advanced DNA testing had identified a male DNA profile at the crime scene. DNA that didn't match Springsteen, Scott, Pierce, or Wellborn. DNA that didn't match any of the suspects who had confessed or been arrested. On October 28, 2009, all charges against Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen were dismissed. They walked free after spending years in prison for murders they didn't commit. The case was once again cold. Families were once again without answers. And somewhere, a killer remained free. The years continued to pass. DNA databases grew. Technology advanced. Investigative genealogy, the technique that would crack the Golden State Killer case, emerged as a powerful new tool for law enforcement. In 2022, Detective Dan Jackson was assigned to the Yogurt Shop murders case. He approached it with fresh determination and access to cutting-edge forensic technology that simply hadn't existed in 1991. In June 2025, Detective Jackson took a crucial step. He submitted a .380 bullet casing that had been recovered from a drain in the Yogurt Shop to the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, NIBIN, a database used to link firearms to crimes across the country. In July 2025, the results came back. The .380 shell casing from Austin matched a casing from an unsolved murder in Lexington, Kentucky. A woman named Linda Rutledge, shot and killed in 1998. But it was a DNA breakthrough that would finally crack the case wide open. Detective Jackson reached out to every lab in the country that conducts YSDR DNA testing of Y chromosome DNA that can help identify male suspects through paternal lineage. He asked if they could manually search against the unknown profile. Only one lab in the entire country responded with a match. On August 22nd, 2025, Detective Jackson received the South Carolina lab report that would change everything. The YSDR DNA profile from the Austin Yogurt Shop murders matched the profile from a 1990 sexual assault and murder in Greenville, South Carolina. The name attached to that profile was Robert Eugene Brashers. Robert Eugene Brashers was born on March 13, 1958, in Newport News, Virginia. Little is known about his early life, but by the mid-1980s, he had already demonstrated his capacity for violence. In November 1985, in Port St. Lucie, Florida, Brashers lured a 24-year-old woman named Michelle Wilkerson into his vehicle. When she tried to leave, he shot her twice, once in the head and once in the neck. Miraculously, Wilkerson survived. She escaped from the vehicle, hid in a culvert, and provided police with a detailed description of her attacker. Brashers was arrested that same night, wandering the beach after his truck got stuck in the sand. He was convicted of attempted first-degree murder, aggravated battery, and firearm charges. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. He served only 3 years. Released on parole in May 1989, Brashers was free to continue his reign of terror. On April 5, 1990, in Greenville, South Carolina, 28-year-old Genevieve "Jenny" Zatricki was found in her bathtub. She had been bludgeoned, raped, and strangled with pantyhose. On the bathroom mirror, the killer had written, Don't fuck with my family. DNA was collected, but there were no matches in any database. The case went cold. Then came December 6, 1991. Austin, Texas. The yogurt shop. Investigators now know that less than 48 hours after murdering Amy, Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza, Robert Brashers was stopped by Border Patrol at a westbound checkpoint between El Paso, Texas, and Las Cruces, New Mexico. He was driving a stolen car from Georgia and was in possession of a .380 pistol, the same make, model, and serial number as the gun he would later use to kill himself. But Brashers was released, and his killing spree continued. In February 1992, he was arrested in Georgia for a stolen vehicle and stolen firearm. Police found a scanner, burglary tools, and a fake Tennessee driver's license in his possession. He was sentenced to 5 years. On March 11, 1997, in Memphis, Tennessee, Brashers raped a 14-year-old girl. He tied her up using her own clothing. She survived. On March 28, 1998, in Portageville, Missouri, Brashers murdered 38-year-old Sherry Scherer and her 12-year-old daughter Megan in their home. Megan was sexually assaulted before being shot to death. Both victims were tied up with their own clothing and shot multiple times. Just hours later, Brashers broke into another home in Dyersburg, Tennessee. He shot a 25-year-old woman who refused his demands. She survived. Ballistics confirmed the same gun was used in both the Missouri murders and the Tennessee shooting. In April 1998, Brashers was arrested for attempting to break into the home of a single woman in Arkansas. The woman had met him at a hardware store where he'd given her his business card, claiming to be a traveling contractor. She later told reporters he carried a video camera, which he claimed was for filming his work to show future clients. Investigators believe Brashers used his construction business as a cover, traveling throughout the southern United States, targeting vulnerable women and girls, leaving a trail of death and destruction. He operated in Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, and Arkansas. Police now suspect he may be responsible for numerous other unsolved murders and sexual assaults throughout the 1990s. But in January 1999, his spree came to an end. On January 19, 1999, police in Kennett, Missouri, located Robert Brashers at a local hotel. He was wanted on multiple warrants and was in possession of a stolen vehicle. When officers approached, Brashers barricaded himself inside his hotel room. A 4-hour standoff ensued. Rather than face arrest and the possibility that his crimes would finally be uncovered, Robert Eugene Brashers placed a .380 pistol, the same weapon he had used to murder the 4 girls in Austin, against his head and pulled the trigger. He was 40 years old. For nearly 2 decades after his death, Brashers' name remained in relative obscurity. His criminal history was known: attempted murder in Florida, various theft and burglary charges, but his true nature as a prolific serial killer was hidden until 2018. In 2006, advances in DNA testing led investigators in Missouri to resubmit evidence from the 1998 Scherer murders. A full suspect DNA profile was developed and entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database. The profile matched DNA from the 1990s Atricky murder in South Carolina. Suddenly, investigators from multiple states were working together, chasing a ghost, a suspect who had committed multiple murders and rapes, but whose identity remained unknown. In 2018, they turned to a revolutionary new technique: investigative genetic genealogy. Cece Moore, a genetic genealogist with Parabon Nanolabs, was brought in to analyze the unknown suspect's DNA profile. Using genetic genealogy databases, Moore began building a family tree, working backward through generations to identify potential suspects. She was able to narrow it down to 2 brothers. One had a violent criminal history. That was Robert Brashers. To confirm the identification, investigators contacted Brashers' surviving family members and obtained DNA samples. Then, on September 27, 2018, they did something extraordinary. They exhumed Robert Brashers' remains from his grave in Paragould, Arkansas. DNA extracted from Brashers' bones was tested. The results were definitive. Robert Eugene Brashers was responsible for the murders of Genevieve Zatricki, Sherry Scherer, Megan Scherer, and the rape of the 14-year-old girl in Memphis. But the connection to Austin had not yet been made. In 2025, 27 years after Brashers' death, Detective Dan Jackson continued his painstaking work on a yogurt shop case. The ballistics match to Kentucky had been promising. The YSDR DNA match to South Carolina had been revelatory. But Jackson needed one more piece of evidence to close the case definitively. In early September 2025, he requested that fingernail clippings collected from Amy Ayers during her 1991 autopsy be retested using the most advanced DNA technology available today, technology that simply didn't exist in 1991 or even in 2018. The results came back on September 26, 2025. The DNA under Amy Ayers' fingernails was a direct match to Robert Eugene Brashers. The statistical likelihood that the DNA belonged to someone other than Brashers was calculated at 2.5 million to 1. After 34 years, the Austin yogurt shop murders were finally solved. On September 26, 2025, Austin police held a press conference announcing the breakthrough. Families of the victims were notified privately beforehand. The announcement came just 1 month after HBO released a documentary series titled The Yogurt Shop Murders, bringing renewed national attention to the case. The evidence against Brashers is overwhelming. His DNA under Amy's fingernails, his DNA in the sexual assault kits of 3 of the 4 victims, the .380 shell casing that matches a suicide weapon, his pattern of behavior, binding victims with their own clothing, using multiple weapons, targeting women and girls, traveling across state lines. Moreover, less than 48 hours after the murders, he was caught fleeing Texas with the murder weapon. But questions remain. Did Brashers act alone? Most evidence suggests yes. His other documented crimes show he was capable of controlling multiple victims by himself, as he did in Memphis in 1997 when he bound and assaulted 4 women single-handedly. Were there other victims? Almost certainly. Investigators are now urging police departments across the country to review cold cases from the mid-1980s through 1999, particularly in southern states, to see if they match Brashers' modus operandi. As authorities celebrate finally solving one of Austin's most notorious cold cases, the story also serves as a cautionary tale about wrongful convictions and coerced confessions. Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen spent years in prison for murders they didn't commit. They were convicted based on confessions obtained after hours of intense interrogation. Confessions they recanted, claiming they were psychologically coerced. No physical evidence ever connected them to the crime scene. The DNA that was eventually found didn't match them, yet they were tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. In 2022, President Joe Biden signed into law the Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act of 2021, legislation directly motivated by the yogurt shop murders. The law ensures that federal law enforcement reviews cold case files and applies the latest technologies and investigative standards. It was this type of persistent, technology-driven investigation that finally identified Robert Brashers. In the aftermath of solving this decades-old case, it's crucial to remember what was lost that December night in 1991. Amy Ayers was 13 years old. She loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She was full of life, energy, and hope. Sarah Harbison was 15. She was close with her family, devoted to her friends, and had her entire life ahead of her. Eliza Thomas was 17. She was a dedicated student and employee, working to save money for her future. Jennifer Harbison was 17. She was a caring older sister, a responsible employee, and a young woman on the cusp of adulthood. 4 lives, 4 futures, all stolen in one night of unspeakable violence. For 34 years, their families have lived with the pain of not knowing who killed their daughters, their sisters, their friends, not knowing if justice would ever be served. The community of Austin was forever changed by these murders. The innocence of a city was shattered. But in the decades since, Austin has also shown remarkable resilience, coming together to support the victims' families and to demand justice. While Robert Brashers has been identified as the perpetrator of the yogurt shop murders, the investigation remains technically open. Authorities continue to analyze evidence and explore whether Brashers may have had any accomplices, though current evidence strongly suggests he acted alone. The Austin Police Department and the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case Unit are also investigating other potential crimes Brashers may have committed during his time in Texas. They're urging anyone with information about Brashers, anyone who may have encountered him, hired him for construction work, or witnessed suspicious behavior, to come forward. Law enforcement agencies across the country are being encouraged to review unsolved murders and sexual assaults from the mid-1980s through 1999, particularly cases involving female victims, binding with clothing, multiple weapons, sexual assault, evidence destruction, and incidents near construction sites or involving transit contractors. The full scope of Robert Brashers' crimes may never be fully known, but thanks to advances in DNA technology, investigative genetic genealogy, ballistic databases, and the tireless dedication of detectives like Dan Jackson, the truth is finally emerging from the shadows. The Austin yogurt shop murders case stands as a testament to several important truths: that justice, though delayed, can still be achieved; that advances in forensic science can solve cases that once seemed impossible; that the determination of investigators and the persistence of families can overcome decades of frustration and dead ends. But most of all, it stands as a reminder that behind every cold case are real victims, real people with real lives, real families, real dreams cut short by violence. Amy Ayers, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, for names that Austin will never forget, for young women whose lives mattered, for victims who, 34 years later, finally received the justice they deserved.